To what extent did the Reform Act of 1832 make Britain a democratic state? The dictionary definition of democracy is a form of government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised directly by them or their elected agents under a free electoral system. If we break that definition down, we can see why Britain was not already a democratic state. It will also help us to understand how the Reform Act of 1832 set Britain in motion to become one. Being a democratic state required two key elements: the liberty to elect an official and the opportunity for a free and fair vote. Before the Reform Act, less than 10% of the British population had access to voting, and voting, thanks to the show of hands approach, was a far cry from fair. Struggles that surrounded the Reform Act. Initially, the bill for the Reform Act had difficulty passing through the House of Lords. In 1831, the House of Commons was largely dominated by Tories, and the Tory government was against allowing more people to vote. They were also against parliamentary reform. It wasn't until November 1830, when Whig Prime Minister Earl Grey came to power, that there was any hope for reform. In April 1831, the existing Parliament was dissolved, making way for the Whig government to take a larger portion of the House of Commons. Later in 1831, the House of Commons passed the Reform Act, but the Tory-dominated House of Lords didn't. When news of this reached the public, riots broke out all over Britain, the worst being in Bristol, where private and community buildings were destroyed by fire, according to the Bristol Gazette, 3rd of November 1831. The people involved in the riots were not ministers or people closely associated with Parliament, but they were rather the lowest creatures of the area, as stated in the Bristol Gazette. People who are willing to go so far as to tear their city apart shows a tremendous display of passion and want for reform, even if it was done in a terribly destructive way. These people had to put up with the way that things had been done for centuries. They didn't have a say in how the country they served and lived in was run, so when there was a solid chance for reform, and perhaps the chance for a better life, they were sure to take it and make a stand. Burning down other people's houses and community centres may seem like a horribly drastic thing to do, but in reality, for most of these people, it was the only way of speaking out and showing they were willing to fight for what they wanted. If the people weren't given a reform, it looked as though a civil war in Britain was a likely outcome, an argument Sir Robert Peel, a Tory, made to the King when the King wanted to restore the Tory government. So what was changed? The Reform Act brought about many changes. 56 rotten boroughs were disenfranchised in England and Wales, returning 111 seats. 30 boroughs with a population less than 4,000 were reduced to having only one Member of Parliament. Ireland and Scotland were awarded more seats, counties were given 65 extra seats, and 21 small towns were given one member each. The property qualification to vote was broadened to include small landowners, tenant farmers, and shopkeepers. In the counties, if you owned a house and paid at least 40 shillings annual rent, you were entitled to vote. If you were a medium leaseholder and paid at least £50, you were given the right to vote. In the boroughs, if you paid a yearly rent of £10 or more, even if you didn't own the house and you were just the tenant, you received the right to vote. John Cam Hobhouse, social reformer and member of the Whig government, thought his minister friends would oppose the £10 qualification clause, but was wrong and found all the supporters were delighted with the bill. It is quite odd that they were happy with this qualification, considering it meant that a vast majority of the working class man was still not allowed the vote. It could be that they were happy just to have the Act passed and have it all over. The Earl Grey certainly was. As Thomas Creevey reflects, it really is too much to see his happiness at it all being over. In total, approximately 1 million people who weren't previously entitled to vote now could. However, considering that the Reform Act didn't even double the amount of voters, and Britain's population of the time was over 16 million, this hardly proves Britain to be democratic. It was also brought to attention how much was being spent on elections. According to Lord John Russell, 1st of March 1831, up to £150,000 was spent on an election in Yorkshire alone. The Reform Act created small ballots in the counties so people didn't have to travel for days to the large cities just to vote and have to return home again. This made it possible for more people who qualified to vote to be able to attend the voting, but it didn't qualify Britain as democratic. The bill made it once again through the House of Commons, but was rejected by the Lords. At this point, Earl Grey resigned. William IV asked the Duke of Wellington to take power again and set up a Tory Parliament, but this he could not do because Sir Robert Peel felt he could not be part of a government that his country was so against. So William was forced to ask Earl Grey to come back. Grey agreed to resume office, but he would only do so if the King would allow more Whig members into Parliament to allow for an easy passing of the Reform Bill. The people once again broke out in riots, and at an attempt to avoid the potential civil war that Britain may come to face, the Duke of Wellington ordered the Tory Lords to either vote for the bill or not show up for the vote. On the 7th of June 1832, the Reform Act was passed. Coincidentally, over 200 Tory Lords were absent from Parliament that day. To what extent did the Great Reform Act make Britain democratic? Part of the definition of a democratic government is the right to vote under a free electoral system. It is true that you were not charged a fee to vote, but you did have to be paying a certain amount of rent to qualify for the vote, and that is, more or less, like paying for the vote. The Reform Act broadened the voters to 217,000 in an electorate of 435,000, so now approximately 1 man in 5 had the right to vote. However, part of democracy is allowing people from all different parts of demographics to vote, and in 1832 it was still only the wealthy who were trusted with the right of having a say in who represents them in Parliament. This Reform Act was the first step towards parliamentary democracy in Britain. The last piece of discriminatory legislation that held people back from the vote was eliminated in 1928. The 1832 Reform Act was a beacon of hope that change was a possibility, that lower classes could be considered worthy of the vote, and that Parliament was ready to take action and do right by their people.